and welcome to another edition of You and Me and Multiple Sclerosis. My name is Pam, and I've been living with multiple sclerosis for over 37 years. And I have been not here very much lately, and the reason for that is that I started out a couple weeks ago with a cold. And then after about a week, the cold went away, and I thought I was fine. And then a week later, like after a week of feeling okay, I started to get the sore throat and the stuffed up nose and all that all over again. And I thought, what is going on here? I thought the cold had come back. But several people said to me, this is dragging on a long time. Maybe you have allergies. And that would be weird because I really haven't had allergies before. But I thought, might as well test that out and see if that could have been true. And so I had my husband pick me up some allergy medicine. And wouldn't you know, that seems to have been at least part of the problem. So I think I'm sort of on the way back to normal again, and I miss you guys, so I'm going to do another video. But being away has given me some time to think about what I might want to talk about. And I was thinking about personality and how living with multiple sclerosis, or for that matter, any chronic illness, might change your personality. Or does it? That's a big question, and I thought I'd look into that. Part of the reason I did that is because I know from when I was working, I took some personality tests, and I found out I had a certain kind of personality. And then when I have been just talking with people over the last year or so, a couple of folks have characterized me in ways that I just didn't think fit me at all. I wasn't thinking that was me at all. But I realized in thinking about it how it might come across to them that I was that kind of a person just because that's the way I tend to react nowadays, or the preferences I tend to have. But is that really a personality change? I wasn't sure. But I thought I'd look into it a little bit. And I'm going to share with you some of the results of my investigation. So here we go. Okay, well, the first publication that I looked at was something out of the European Network of MS Centers. And this report, which I will link in the description so you can read the whole thing, is called Personality, Behavior, and Multiple Sclerosis. And here's the table of contents just so that you can see what it covers. It asks the question, why does MS affect personality and behavior? Gives different reasons why behavior might be affected. And how does MS affect personality and behavior, and what can be done about it? So that's kind of the overview. But I'm just going to look at a couple of things that the report actually covers. The report says, and I'll read this part, MS causes changes in parts of the brain and spinal cord. Lesions, MS plaques, and other brain changes in the brain sometimes result in behavioral changes. The nature and severity of the changes depends on which parts of the brain are affected. We call these changes organic because the disease process causes the symptoms. Organic changes may or may not disappear as healing processes take place. So in other words, there are things that happen to our brains structurally, physically, that really don't lend themselves to behavior modification kinds of things. Whether you're going to go by force of will try to change how you behave, or whether you're going to go to therapy, psychological therapy, to get your personality straightened out, it may not work because your brain may just be physically different now, and that might affect your personality. As they say, the most common behavioral changes in MS, which can arise from organic reasons, are the following. And they talk about depression or hidden depression, which is depression that's hidden behind a seemingly happy surface. Euphoria, which is appearing unrealistically happy and undisturbed by anything distressing. Emotional lability, which is when emotions swing from one moment to another. Blunted emotions, which are emotional flatness. Uncontrolled laughter or crying, which is sudden laughing or crying without a reason, or an inappropriate reason. You might cry at something funny, or you might laugh at something sad. Lack of insight, being unaware of the symptoms or their consequences. Disinhibited behavior, lack of judgment, lack of empathy, failure to perceive other people's emotions. So it sounds like kind of a drawing in and becoming a lot more self-centered. And then finally, lack of initiative or apathy. And as I read through the list, you might be thinking about yourself and feeling that at times perhaps you have exhibited some of these. And some of them to you might seem very unlike any experience you've actually had. And they're not trying to say that everybody's going to have all of these, but these are just some of the common organic reasons why a person's behavior might seem to be changing, or their personality might be changing. And they do, of course, talk about other reasons besides the organic reasons, a big one being medication. We all know that medication can cause you to behave in ways that you wouldn't normally behave. So they're very aware of that as a possibility. The other publication that I looked at can be found at the website for the National Library of Medicine, which is part of the NIH. And all the information is provided there on how to cite it, but I've also included the link below as a reference. And the title of the study is Personality Traits in Women with Multiple Sclerosis, Discrepancy in Patient-Partner Report and Disease Course. Interesting title, because what it's telling me right away is that the measure of whether a person's personality has changed is coming from reports of what the partner says, as well as the patient's own self-assessment of how their personality has been over the course of their disease. And just looking at the abstract of the publication is pretty interesting. It gives you some idea of what they were after here. Their objective is the following. Patients diagnosed with multiple sclerosis are believed to undergo personality changes which could have implications for how they perceive themselves and are perceived by others. We endeavored to examine the extent to which patients' self-perceptions are congruent, which means they match, with how they are perceived by significant others across 5 trait domains as demarcated by the well-known 5-factor model. And if you're not familiar with the 5-factor model, I'm going to be going through that a little bit more in a minute so that you'll get an idea. But it is one very common personality assessment, questionnaire, test, inventory, whatever, that's often used in psychiatry, psychology. I never actually took a test that got at this when I was at work, but I am familiar with it. And as I said, I will go into detail on that in just a moment. So in other words, the methods that they used here were to administer those tests, those inventories for the 5 factors to the women with MS and their spouses or partners, and then try to correlate to see if they could see the difference between what the patient reported on themselves versus what the partner reported about them. And then here are the results according to their study. Correlation analyses revealed good correspondence between patient and partner during relapsing remitting MS, but not secondary progressive MS. And I thought that was very interesting. So in other words, according to their data, if you have relapsing remitting MS, your self-awareness is apparently better, or maybe you're not as much in denial as you are when you go into secondary progressive. I'm not really sure what that means. They found the correlation, but I don't know what conclusion a person could really draw from that. It says that the significant differences were that patients often rated themselves higher than their partners rated them in extroversion and openness. And again, we'll talk about that in just a minute. And their conclusion is that these discrepancies are probably multidimensional and may have neurological and or psychological causes. So there might be a combination of physical, as we talked about before, actual structural changes in the brain, or psychological causes, because living with chronic illness does change your psychology somewhat. Your outlook on life is bound to be affected by that. The direction of the discrepancies are consistent with some prior research suggesting MS, which is the disease affecting both the central white and gray matter, may give rise to lowering in self-awareness. Conversely, patients may be finding emotional or personal benefits in their response to the disease unbeknownst to partners. I thought that was kind of intriguing. That's got to be speculative. I'm not really sure what their basis is for that, but interesting. So in other words, having the chronic illness might give the patient some insight that they even find beneficial, but that it doesn't really come across to their partner. Very, very interesting. Well, let's talk a little bit about this 5-factor model of personality, and I'll put this link in the description. But basically, personality, according to this model, is a combination of a number of factors, and we start at 12 o'clock there: openness, conscientiousness, extroversion, agreeableness, and neuroticism. Well, let's go ahead and take a look at those 5 factors in a little bit more detail, so that might be of some help to you. First of all, openness to experience. If you're open to experience, it means that you're amenable to unconventional ideas and beliefs, including those which challenge your existing assumptions, and that you also enjoy artistic and cultural experiences. So in other words, you're still willing to look at things that you haven't before, things that aren't familiar. As it says here, less open individuals value the safety of predictability and like to adhere to well-known traditions and routines. That's the distinction there. How open are you to something that you've never done before, that you've never tried before, that you've never heard before, that you've never eaten before? All those things play into it. And then it says at the last here that openness to experience gradually decreases with age anyway. So having a chronic illness that's gone on for many years, if you're less open than you used to be, is it because of your MS, or is it because you're just getting older? And as people get older, they tend to value routines, predictability, and be less open to new experiences because they just don't feel safe. On the conscientiousness factor, to be conscientious means to be aware of one's actions and the consequences of one's behavior, to feel a sense of responsibility toward others, and generally careful to carry out the duties assigned to you, and that you'd like to keep a tidy environment and be well organized, that you're keen to maintain good timekeeping so that you're on time for your appointments and you don't grossly underestimate the amount of time it's going to take you to do something. And then finally, to exhibit more goal-oriented behavior rather than spur of the moment, que sera, sera, whatever will be, will be. And as the article says, unconscientious individuals are less concerned by tidiness and punctuality. This may result in their arriving late to appointments and meetings and being more relaxed in setting life goals. Unconscientious people tend to engage in more impulsive behavior. They will act on a last-minute whim rather than considering the consequences of their choices. Now, you will probably notice as we go through these, because these are basically quotes right from the article, you will notice that there does seem to be a bias in this personality assessment. And I can't help but feel a little bit, maybe not defensive, that's not the right word, because at least in this metric, I actually scored pretty high on conscientiousness, but I can't say that being conscientious is the be-all and end-all. We probably do need people that are a little more impulsive. We need people to have a little bit less of a fixation on being on time for everything. I don't know. I mean, I'm just kind of feeling like the way unconscientiousness is described just sounds very negative, and I'm not really sure that that's entirely fair. Another term that gets thrown around so much, it's hard to actually know what to say it means in a clinical sense, is the word extroversion. And to most people, it does mean outgoing and socially confident, sociable, talkative, often forward in social situations, that you enjoy being the center of a group and will often seek the attention of others, whereas introverts enjoy being part of a smaller social group and preferably with familiar people. To me, that is an incredible oversimplification of the difference between extroversion and introversion, but for purposes of this inventory, that is the definition that they're going with. And then on the dimension of agreeableness, here's how that's defined. Agreeableness means friendly and cooperative, often considered more likable, trusting of others, more altruistic, so generous, in other words, willing to help others during times of need. You often work well as a member of a team. You dislike being involved in arguments, conflicts with others, and other forms of confrontation. Instead, you seek to pacify and appease others, acting as the mediating peacemaker of the group. And again, I just feel some bias here that being agreeable basically means getting along better with other people, and that's just a better thing. Now, okay, it may seem like it, but let's look at the opposite, the disagreeableness, and see what they have to say about that. They say that disagreeable individuals find it easier to promote their own interests. Now, if that doesn't scream bias, I don't know what does. It just sounds like anyone who's promoting their own interests, it's got to be a bad person. And that's just how it comes across to me. I don't know. Maybe that's not exactly how they meant it, but that's kind of how I look at it. Doesn't everyone have times when they promote their own interests? I don't know how you could survive otherwise. But that doesn't mean that you're a disagreeable person. And isn't there what they call win-win, when you can promote your own interests and others' interests at the same time? Maybe there's another way, a third way. I don't know. They don't seem to factor that in. I guess even though they say everything's on a continuum, they must just be looking at the extremes here. So someone who's disagreeable would be someone who never looks at anyone else's interests but their own. I would admit that is pretty disagreeable. Our agreeableness levels, like some of the other dimensions, they're fluid throughout our lives, and they tend to increase as we grow older, according to them anyway. According to this article, our agreeableness levels would increase as we get older, which is interesting because the stereotype of the grumpy old man doesn't seem to fit that. And I don't know if that's true or not. Are we more agreeable as we get older, or do we tend to be less tolerant, less patient? I don't know. In a way, it almost flies in the face of some of the other things that they've talked about earlier. And then finally, neuroticism. And this is a tough one. So instead of just extracting bullet points, I just went ahead and extracted from the article, which I'll read to you so that you can understand what they're saying here. This personality dimension is measured on a continuum ranging from emotional stability, which would be low neuroticism, to emotional instability, which would be high neuroticism. People with high neuroticism scores are often persistent worriers. They are more fearful and often feel anxious, overthinking their problems and exaggerating their significance. Rather than seeing the positive in a situation, they may dwell on its negative aspects. Neuroticism can result in a person coping less successfully with common stressors in their day-to-day lives. Instead, they will often become frustrated with others and may feel angry if events do not occur as they wish. In terms of being motivated by the prospect of reward versus being driven by the need to avoid punishment, higher levels of neuroticism are associated with the latter. So in other words, if you are low in neuroticism, you might be more motivated by rewards. But if you're high in neuroticism, your goal is mainly to avoid punishment, avoid the bad consequences of any given path that you might choose. So think about that in terms of choosing an MS therapy. Those of us who are high in neuroticism would focus on avoiding possible negative side effects of the therapy, whereas those of us who are motivated more by reward and therefore low in neuroticism might be more focused on trying a medication that might have a few risks, but the rewards might be really great too. Well, I decided to look at this a little bit differently, using a tool that I was more familiar with, but I think many people would say not being scientific enough with it, because I think people might take issue. Well, we'll see how that goes. But I wanted to look at what they call the MBTI, the Myers-Briggs Personality Inventory, as a way of seeing whether my personality has changed in the years that I've had MS. I've taken this a couple of times through my working career. The last time was in 2001. And though I don't have the raw data, I do have the results, and I remember enough about the raw data. I think I can speak to that, and hopefully that will give us a little insight into whether personality does change when you have multiple sclerosis. And the first thing we want to look at is how they define the different terms. The Myers-Briggs inventory basically gives you a designation of your personality based on 4 letters, one from each of these 4 groups. Either you're introverted or extroverted. Extroversion has to do with preference for drawing energy from the outside world of people, activities, or things, as opposed to introversion, which is a preference for drawing energy from one's internal world of ideas, emotions, or impressions. The second letter is either going to be an S or an N, depending on whether you're a sensing or an intuitive person. Sensing people have a preference for taking in information through the senses and noticing what is actual, whereas intuitive people have a preference for taking in information through a sixth sense and noticing what might be. And then on the third dimension, this is how you make decisions, either thinking or feeling. And thinking people have a preference for organizing and structuring information to decide in a logical, objective way, as opposed to feeling people who have a preference for organizing and structuring information to decide in a personal, value-oriented way. And then finally, the fourth dimension has to do with how you live. And that the words are a little bit unfortunate, I think, in some ways, because they're kind of misleading. You're either characterized by judgment or perception. So you're either a J or a P. And the judgment is a preference for living a planned and organized life, while the perception is a preference for living a spontaneous and flexible life. And as I said, I've taken this test a few times and always came out with the same score, the most recent one being about 20 years ago. And my type always came out as an ENFP, so extroverted, intuitive, feeling, perceiving. But one of the things that I'll share with you is that some of these felt pretty close to almost 50-50. On the extroverted, yes, I probably was about 60% extroverted, but my score showed that I had a high level of introversion as well. Now, the intuitive was the one area where I was 100% on the intuitive. I remember one time I got absolutely 0 on the other side of it, the sensing side. So in other words, I get 0% of my information from my 5 senses, and I'm not as concerned with what really is as I am with what could be. But then on the thinking and feeling, that one was very balanced. I came out with feeling as a slightly higher score, but they were pretty close. And perceiving versus judging, there was a little bit more of a majority score there with the perceiving as opposed to the judging, but there still was some judging there. So when you're given this type as a label, don't think that that means that this is 100% how you are. But I think it's helpful for you to know those scores just as we're going through, because it's going to show what I'm trying to get at here, and that is that I don't know whether personality is really that subject to change just because we have MS. Well, I found a number of personality tests online, and they were free, so I thought I'd take a few of them and just see, now that it's been a long time since I've had a personality test, let's see how I do. So this first one that I found was that of Practical Psychology, and I've got the link there and I'll put it below. And here are my test results. I see what they tried to do here was kind of a combination of the Myers-Briggs, but also the other one that we talked about, the five-factor one. And as you see here, they say I'm an extrovert. I'm in the 92nd percentile of that. I'm also agreeable. I'm conscientious. But on the other hand, I'm pretty high in neurotic, which I guess I would have agreed with. But I'm also very open, very open. I got a pretty high score in that. Good to know as I go down here, I see 0% in psychopathy, so I just want you to know we can all be relieved about that one. And Machiavellianism, which is the manipulation of people to get what you want, I think. That I scored really low in, and I'm happy about that. Narcissism was a little bit higher than one might have thought, but I guess no cause for alarm. You have to be a bit of a narcissist to be wanting to be on YouTube, I suppose. But you see how it ends up with. It gives me the same personality type that I had 20 years ago, the ENFP. Here's another one I went out and looked at, the Type Finder personality test. I took this test, which is another free one, and it says, this is interesting, it says I'm an ENFJ, just the way I answered the questions. Now, one thing that was different about this one was that the first one, you had to answer this or this. You had to say, I would rather be this or this. I would rather do this or this. Whereas this one and some of the ones to follow, you had to choose whether you agreed or strongly disagreed or were neutral. So you had more of a range were your answers instead of having to pick one side or the other. So that may have accounted for a little bit of the difference, but you notice here that the letter J is now different. I'm not a P here, I'm a J. So I want things to be more structured. And I think that I do actually with MS. I think I kind of do. That was one of the things that got me thinking about personality and MS, because somebody characterized me as somebody who was very ordered and liked to have things under control. And I thought, well, really, that wasn't how I was typed years ago. But apparently there's more of that in my personality now, or at least that's how I express things now, and I wouldn't have in the past. And I just want to tell you, I was trying to be pretty honest through all of this. I wasn't trying to game the system, but it's interesting to me the variety that I'm coming up with. Here's another one that I took. And according to this, I'm introverted, intuitive, feeling, and judging. So this one has me as an introvert and not an extrovert. Still intuitive, still feeling, but then again judging. So apparently my way of living now seems to be more than a little bit affected by having MS. I will admit that. I don't seem to be as carefree or as alive to the possibilities as I might have been as a younger person. And here we have yet another personality test that says I am an INFP. So again, I'm an introvert, still intuitive, still feeling, and still perceiving. So pretty much the same, except I'm more introverted in this one than I was in the other one. I guess I probably answered the questions as honestly as I could, but it's interesting how probably one or two answers that are slightly different can make a difference in how you're typed in the end. So what is a person supposed to make of all of this? Well, let's go back to what I originally was typed as through my working career. And let's remember that I said in the beginning that of the 4 factors, 3 of them had scores that were, if not really close, pretty close. So while I was, yes, more extroverted than introverted, I had a strong introvert streak. Same with thinking and feeling. I had a strong thinking streak despite the fact that feeling won out. And perceiving versus judging, I was more of a perceiver than a judger, though I had some judging in there. The intuitive is the only one that has stayed consistent. If you notice through all of those tests that I took, intuitive always stayed the same. I never tested as an S. So one of the things that I'm postulating is that perhaps when you have MS or any kind of chronic illness, it does change your perspective on life. And perhaps some of the parts of your personality that did not come to the fore as often get a little bit more of a voice in how you do things. It's true that I do prefer to be home alone a lot more than I used to. I like people still. I'm very, very interested in people, but I can only take small doses of company and socialization now. I get tired. It doesn't mean that my values have really changed, but I know my limits. The same thing happens with perceiving and judging. I love the idea that things are still open-ended, that there are possibilities out there. But in reality, I have to keep my life pretty structured. I have to be very mindful of time and routine so that I don't waste all my energy doing nothing and then have nothing left at the end of the day for something else that really I wanted to do or needed to be done. And the same with thinking and feeling. So I really don't know whether I think my personality has changed much having MS. I just think that more aspects of it are seeing the light of day, whereas in the past, they kind of were hidden. I don't know whether we can honestly say that a person's actual personality changes, or whether what they exhibit to the world, how they react to external stimuli, changes. And part of that could be a function of age, as we've seen in a couple of the points that were made in the article that we looked at. And part of it could be just living with a chronic illness does kind of change your perspective on things. But at heart, are we really different people than we used to be? I'm not sure that I'm quite ready to say that yet. I really would be curious to know if you've thought about this or looked into it, or if you have any ideas or insights you'd like to share. Please leave me a comment. I'd love to hear from you. Well, that is all I have for you today, so take good care of yourself, and I will see you again in my next video.